This is a series of recordings in the New Civic Leaders in Greater Vancouver Region series. And we're starting with none other than Councillor Daniel Fontaine. So I'm so glad that he's the first guest for those series. Daniel's got like a 6-page long CV, so I'm not going to talk about that. But it's still important to say that he's the godfather and godmother of a new organization in New West called New West Progressives. And Daniel, first of all, welcome. Good to see you again. And New West Progressives, the New West part, I know what it means. And progressives, I'm interested in finding out how you decided on and how do you sort of use that word in that context.
Well, first of all, thank you, JP, for having me on. I'm glad to be the first guest on this series. And you point out a very interesting thing around the name of the elector organization that I'm connected with. And yes, it is the New West Progressives. Oftentimes, the word progressive is used in the context of the United States of America. And people were so inundated with American media and reporting that we often hear about progressives from the United States. But it fascinated me that, in Canada, we actually had the word progressive in front of the word conservative long before there was ever progressives in the United States. And when we were thinking about establishing a name for the New West Progressives, the word progress kept coming up. As we kept thinking, what could we call it? And, we lack progress in the city of New Westminster on so many things, on so many fronts, that we kind of all looked at each other and went, why don't we just call it the New West Progressives? And everyone kind of went, that just is such a natural, it makes sense, because we all were committed back when we founded the New West Progressives in about 2017. We said we want to make progress in this city, and we just find that there's a lot of status quo thinking, there's a lot of old thinking, and we want to make some progress. And that's really where the word came from. And of course, my political opponents will say, oh, you're not progressive, but they're defining that in the context of U.S. politics, not in the context of New Westminster politics. And I think if you looked at many of the initiatives that we've implemented and put into the platforms in 2022, they were very progressive. So that's why we ended up choosing the word New West Progressives. And it's been well received by the public. In 2018, we ran some candidates, got one elected. In 2022, we got 3 people elected, 2 to council and 1 on the school board. And in the recent by-election that was run for the school board, we won that. So now we have 4 members of our New West Progressives caucus, and no doubt in October 2026 we will form the majority.
Well, congratulations, because you're going in the right direction in terms of elected officials. And as I said, in no small part thanks to you, because you put in 5-6 years, if not more, at least 7 years now, and so it's going well. Again, you're not new to either civic governments or campaigns and so on, but one of the things which stands out to me is when you ran the Mayor Sullivan's campaign for his mayoralty bid, and even before that, I think when he was a councillor, and then for those 3 years, 2005 to 2008, you were his chief of staff. And going back to the word progressive, a lot of progressive initiatives came into play during that time. Some of them are still ongoing. Some of them, the succeeding left-leaning governments kind of got rid of it, and we may get a chance to touch upon it. But one of the things you addressed was kind of, in a way, the paradigm shift of what density is, because before that, density was a 4-letter word. It was always thought something bad. And with Mayor Sullivan and yourself, you started defining density in a way that density is also an answer to some of the urban problems and challenges. So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, JP, to think that back in 2005, which is almost 20 years now, hard to believe, it's been a couple of decades, but when Mayor Sullivan at the time started talking about densification in the way that he was talking about it, he was really one of the only urban leaders in North America to be talking the way he was talking, because as he would say, for a politician to be talking about density was political death. Like nobody wanted to talk about it because if they did, they'd be run out of town, with the pitchforks. But Mayor Sullivan wanted to make it part of his term in office, and he really wanted to make sure that when the issue of density came up, it came up in the context of other things other than it being bad. So a whole concept of eco-density came forward, and it was the first time that a city the size of Vancouver talked about densification to solve problems like transportation, so trying to get people to live closer to where they work. It had an ecological component to it in that it wanted to stop urban sprawl and having our precious agricultural land in the Fraser Valley being kind of, mowed over and kind of having concrete and houses built onto it. So it was so ahead of its time when you think of it. And I look back at the last couple of decades and now how much this is just part of the common verbiage that we use of that densification. Of course, it makes sense to keep people close to where they work and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, it wasn't well received. And interestingly, going back to our previous point, Vision Vancouver were the opposition at the time. They were supposedly the progressive political folks on council. They fought it tooth and nail. They did not want the mayor to talk about eco-density. They didn't want to bring it forward. They fought it all the way, voted against it. And yet we look back now and like you said, it was a very progressive policy and it really helped, I think, to lay the foundation of where we're at today in terms of better understanding of the connection between densification and carbon emissions and how, there's a reason why Manhattan and downtown Vancouver have some of the lowest carbon emissions on the planet. It's because people actually walk and live close to where they work. They can walk to grocery stores, they can walk to the theater, the cinema, all the things that make living so much fun in an urban area. That's why their carbon footprint is so much lower than a place like Langley or in Chilliwack or in the Fraser Valley. So yeah, it was exciting to be part of it. It was a tumultuous time. Like I said, it was not easy to be advocating for densification at a time that the D word was just not spoken at City Hall.
Good. Now, this is like a couple of different topics rolled into one, so it's going to be a little rambling question, but I'm sure you can make sense of it. There's an ongoing challenge on the junior most governments, not the feds, not the province, but the local governments, where the problems which the feds don't want, and if they can, they would give it to the provinces. And if the provinces don't want or deal with it, or it's too hot a potato, they'll just ignore it and let the cities kind of work with it. So it's on one hand, downloading of some of the responsibilities of the government towards citizens. And that means downloading not only the problems, but without any equivalent funding or anything given to the cities. So that the cities end up are the default cleaner-uppers of the societal problems. And I don't need to elaborate on what's happening right now in our streets, including a new Westminster, I'm sure. And the second aspect is where the senior governments, and especially under EB, this current NDP government, where they reach into the pockets of the taxpayers and use the excuse or mislabel some sort of a levy and then extract the money out of that city. And that makes it even more difficult for the cities to either increase the taxes or whatever, because a lot of the money goes to the senior levels of governments. And we have that instance too, of course, where that so-called school levy and the money goes to the general revenue in the province and not to schools. And so it's an insult as well as picking of pockets. So the challenge again is, how do the civic governments deal with the downloading of the responsibilities, and what defenses do you have, or what recourse do you have as a civic government?
Well, that's a very good question and a lot to unpack in there. I will say that there actually is two parts to it. There's downloading, which we've all heard of from senior orders of government. And then there's what you just referred to with the school levy, and I call it uploading. So they upload the cash and download the responsibilities. It's the worst combination you could ever have. So what do cities, to respond to your question, what can they do in regards to this? Unfortunately, they're very limited in terms of what they can do. But there are some cities that are pushing back, and I'll use New Westminster and I'll use Vancouver as an example. And in Vancouver, what they did was they actually quantified some of this downloading, because sometimes it's very opaque. You don't know, what does it mean to say downloading? And so the city of Vancouver paved the way in terms of actually defining what downloading means. And they quantified it, and they actually were able to effectively almost send a bill to Victoria to say, look, this is a lot of money. And I can't remember the figure, but I believe it was like $500 million a year, give or take, that the city of Vancouver was taking on in terms of responsibilities that were primarily the responsibility of senior orders of government. So New Westminster, I actually, as a city councillor, moved a motion at city council, and I tried to replicate that in the city of New Westminster, because when I got on council, I couldn't believe how many things that we were doing that clearly fall within the responsibility of the province of British Columbia. And yet we, our local ratepayers, were paying for this. And they were, like you said, we were sending money up for the school levies, and yet we were being handed all these responsibilities. And oftentimes, I'll try to, JP, put it in the context that people can understand in terms of downloading. But when you look on the streets of what's happening in downtown New West and downtown Vancouver and other urban centers in Metro Vancouver, you look at how many times the fire department is called out for medical emergencies and medical issues. It is staggering, absolutely staggering. The amount of money that city taxpayers are paying to pay the fire department to effectively do the job of the BC ambulance service, who often don't show up. It's our fire department that shows up because they're closer. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I remember when the fire chief in New Westminster came to us and gave a presentation and gave out the stat. It was staggering. Again, it's the only way to describe it. How many times these call-outs from the fire department had nothing to do with fires. It had everything to do with drug overdoses and with the opioid overdose crisis. It had everything to do with a lack of mental health beds, a lack of provincial investments in treatment. I mean, the list goes on and on. So that's a real tangible downloading that cities have to pick up. And unfortunately, we're left with very few things other than public persuasion and effectively in what Vancouver did and what New Westminster is now doing, because my motion got passed, so we're in the process of working on quantifying that downloading, is public shaming. And it really shouldn't get to that level. The provinces and the federal government should be at the table, and they should be partnering with us. And I will say, I find some of the discussion rather amusing when I hear federal leaders talk about municipal governments aren't doing enough or whatever, or they're going to hold back their infrastructure dollars if cities aren't doing enough. Boy, I would love to be able to see cities have the power to say, well, we're going to hold back doing your job, the job that you should be doing on the streets, unless we get the funding to pay for it. So it's complex, but in many ways, it's also it's a simple problem to fix.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about at least a couple of more things, and one of them would be and it's kind of related to downloading, and that's why I'm saying, where areas of Vancouver, and it's not just certain areas of Vancouver, it's throughout Vancouver and New Westminster. Throughout the city, the streets are being taken over by the repeat offenders and not the residents. And it's a safety issue, it's a security issue, it's also law and order issue. But it seems like, the police would eventually come if there's an incident or whatever, but they'll give you the police incident number. which, I'm being cynical perhaps, but it just helps the police board next time around ask for more money because that's how many people, are out there. But what do you think is the kind of the answer to this problem? And I know not everybody who's a quote unquote criminal or repeat offender is fully in control of their mental faculties. And that goes back to the problem of mental health issues. And again, it's the city streets where you see that manifest. It's not in front of the parliament buildings, it's not, or anything else. So how do you think, or rather, how well do you think the civic governments are able to cope with that? Because it appears that it's not working. Yeah.
Well, it not only appears, it is not working. And we've seen, unfortunately, some tragic incidents even as recently in the last few weeks where a young woman lost her life in North Surrey as a result of a repeat offender who was let go and back on the street within weeks committed a murder in this young woman tragically lost her life. And she's but one of literally thousands of people who have been impacted by repeat offenders. I will say that I want to be careful around having a discussion about repeat offenders and people with mental illness, because not everyone with mental illness is obviously a criminal. That just nobody, I think we want to be clear about that. But there are unfortunately people with mental illness that are committing crimes. It's because they haven't perhaps got the supports or they don't have the right access to treatments, etc. But when we're looking at repeat offenders, people who 30, 40, 50 times have been arrested and is simply put back on the street, and they go back in and they break in and they, these are the things that when you talk about downloading, I talked about the fire department that has to deal with this. Our police have to deal with it, and they are limited because the police can only enforce the rules that the provincial and federal governments put into place. And no doubt the police are frustrated across not only my community in Westminster, I'm sure across all of Canada, that when they catch someone, they recommend charges, they go through the system, and then literally the afternoon, the next afternoon, they're arresting them again. It must be incredibly frustrating. I know I've spoken kind of casually to various police officers over the years, but what can they do? And really, what can cities do? But again, these costs, like one of the two largest costs that we have as cities, one is fire and one's police.
Yeah.
And the public is constantly saying we need more police, we need more security, we need more issues of crime and safety dealt with. So there's no shortage of people who want to have it. But at the end of the day, if your whole system is constructed to effectively facilitate people getting arrested and then put back on the street, you have to ask yourself, do we have a problem? And I think clearly we do. So I've heard some musings from the federal government. I've seen some of the actions that they've taken in terms of trying to tighten this up. I heard the Premier talk about wanting to tighten things up. I think we have a long way to go. I'll be careful. I try to stick in my lane. This area of the judicial system is well beyond one that people in municipal government have control over, but we do end up having to kind of pay the price, literally, in terms of the cost of our policing services. I will also say that, going back and just touching a little bit back on the mental health side, is one of the things I've talked about countless times is how, we just are not making enough investments in mental health, and that is a provincial responsibility. And I think it is so absolutely cruel that people who are living with mental illnesses, people who need treatment, people who are walking around our streets and who are clearly in a state of psychosis, whether it's drug-induced or not, that they're not getting the care that they need. And this is not a problem, JP, that's just started a year or two ago.
Yeah,
we're talking literally decades of this being built up. And I don't know what it'll take. Honestly, I'm at a loss, and I pride myself on being able to come to the table with solutions, but I don't understand why the province is not treating this like a crisis the way it is manifesting itself on the streets. It's a crisis, and it's thousands of crises across the province. And I've said again, countless times that if these people had cancer, or if they had a broken leg, or if they were bleeding on the street, we would have our healthcare system wrap around them immediately. But because they have a mental illness, they fall through the cracks. And as a result of that, they're put at risk, and oftentimes they're harmed by other people on the street and beyond, and that's so unfortunate.
But again, as you said, it's a provincial jurisdiction and it's a provincial responsibility, but the civic governments, it's the city streets where it's manifest most of all, and none of us, and I'm not talking about tourists, it's not just putting good parents for the tourist. As Canadians, as citizens, it makes us feel so bad, so literally ashamed that we are still haven't been able to find, or our government hasn't been able to find any solutions.
I think any government can only be defined by how it takes care of its weakest member of its citizenry. And to me, when you're suffering and you're living with a mental illness, you are unhoused, you don't have shoes, you're living in the back alley. I mean, I don't know what more what other additional crises these individuals have to face for the government to realize that we need to step in and we need to do something. And to me, it's a sad reflection of priorities when, I don't want to pick on FIFA, but you look at things like FIFA and other events, like we're so quick to be able to invest and put hundreds of millions of dollars into these things. And yet I'm in my community and I see these individuals who would so desperately need to get access to mental health treatments and mental health bed and psychiatrists and psychologists. They don't have access to it. Yeah. And it's manifesting on the streets.
It's one of the saddest things. And it's an inelegant segue, but I want to sort of talk about another one of the issues which I've heard you in the news in the last few weeks, and to do with the wastewater treatment facility for the GVRD. And the costs, it's not built yet, it's a long way from there, but even before that, the costs of the projects have gone up 500% or something like that. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think went wrong, and how did a bunch of unelected people, that's the GVRD board, sort of got us to this point? Because the bottom line is that we will be paying for it in the long run. So please tell us what's going on there.
Well, I'll start first by saying it's a complex tale. So it's not an easy thing, and it's not one person to blame. It's a lot to blame, and that's in part of the problem. Is there's too many players that own a bit of this, and it goes back to, as you said, we have a 41-person unelected board at the GVRD, now known as Metro Vancouver. We have a 41-person board. JP, I challenge you to point to any other private sector board, any other corporate board, any other government board that is comprised of 41 individuals from different communities around a particular region. It's a model that was established over 50 years ago. And I'll tell you, we're sitting in this room with some new technology and we're doing a podcast. And I can't help but try to position it to you that if you tried to do a podcast with technology from 50 years ago, how would your podcast sound today? Probably not that good. Try, cooking dinner with 50-year-old technology in your kitchen. Probably wouldn't be the same. Try driving with a 50-year-old car. I could go on and on. And yet in Metro Vancouver, every single day we operate our governance with a 50-year-old governance model. And then we ask ourselves why a project on the North Shore went from $500 million to $4 billion, why it's the largest financial debacle in terms of a percentage of cost overruns of any infrastructure project in the province's history. Let me state that again, because I think it's an important point to make. The province's history, the worst debacle, financial debacle, all by a group of people who, many are probably well-intentioned, they're nice people, I know many of them, but the construct of that board is just so flawed because it's unaccountable, it's unelected, It is not there as proper oversight for the kind of projects that we're undertaking. And JP, we've talked a lot about money today, about downloading and costs. Remember, one of the biggest costs that you get on your bills every year comes from Metro Vancouver. It's called your sewer and your wastewater and the water and all this stuff. These utilities, they've been going up double digits for years, and the projections looking out for the next decade is that they're going to be going up year over year, double digits. Your paycheck isn't going up double digits. Your income isn't going up double digits. So something's got to give here. So to answer your question directly around what went wrong with the wastewater treatment plant, the simple answer is we don't know. And that's the reason why I've been calling for an audit and calling for the BC Auditor General to get involved. I've also pointed out the fact that back in 2021, had the NDP government, led then by Premier Horgan, had they not closed the Municipal Auditor General's office, this discussion might be academic right now, because I suspect this whole project would be under the audit of the Municipal Auditor General, who would be going under the hood and finding out what went wrong. Unfortunately, we have to now beg and plead the Provincial Auditor General to take a look. Even the Provincial Auditor General Act is limited in terms of what they can do. So to answer your question, we may never know the answers to what went wrong. I could speculate. I could tell you it's the wrong location. I could tell you it was the firing of the contractor. I could tell you it's a lack of... I could list off 20 things. I would only be speculating if I did that. That's why it's so important that someone come in and does that audit. But in addition to that, we also need the Premier to step in, because I don't believe it's ever going to come from the 41. I call them the Club 41, the people who are running Metro Vancouver. I don't think Club 41 is going to be the one asking for a governance review of themselves. I mean, why would they? They are comfortable, they're unelected, they collect over $1,000 per day to attend meetings, countless meetings of countless committees that meet for weeks on end. So the governance review is equally as important as the audit, because what the governance review will do while the audit is being conducted is get us ready for looking into the future. And JP, I'm worried. I'm very worried for my son, for my grandchildren. Hopefully we get some grandkids. And I'm worried for a lot of families in the Lower Mainland, because when you look at the costs of the future projects, and that's what's important about an audit, there's two parts to it. Looking back, the post-mortem, you kind of figure out what went wrong. But you use an audit to help guide you as a blueprint for making sure you don't repeat mistakes of the past into the future. And unfortunately, JP, we have a project right now in Richmond at the Iona Wastewater Treatment Plant that is right now going to be 3 times the cost of the existing North Shore Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's pegged at between $10 to $12 billion and climbing. It is, in my view, it's an existential threat to the financial sustainability of our region if what happened in the North Shore happens at Iona. We are going to be in a major financial crisis in this region, because we simply cannot afford to have a $20 or $30 billion mistake happening there. And that's my concern. Like now, this week, while we're recording this podcast, Metro Vancouver spent, 90 minutes, a few questions, a $60.6 million consulting contract was awarded, and this Iona project is now underway. It's the beginning of the spending, and it's not going to end there.
It's the part which is really scary is that the unelected people get to decide and vote and decide on a budget to which the figure is not realistic, or they're not responsible if something goes out of control. And that just, it's an intermediate level of government of the unelected.
It goes to the fundamental democratic principle of representation for dollars spent, for tax dollars. You have effectively a government, even though they don't refer to themselves as a government, but they're a government, they're a regional government. They're making multi-billion-dollar expenditures for which the expenses merely get added onto your tax bill at the end of the year, your utility bill. They're not elected. They're not even accountable. So at the end of the day, if everything falls apart, these 41, part of Club 41, just go back to their own municipalities, get reelected, and then go back and get onto the board again with no ramifications at all for a lack of oversight and a lack of proper governance within their own organization. You know, JP, here's an interesting figure for you. $1.6 million. You know what that $1.6 million is? It's the amount that we spent to pay for the board of directors at Club 41 last year. That's how much per diems they collected. That's how much extra salary they got. $1.6 million spread amongst 41 unelected
And
directors.
that is in addition to their regular salary for their regular
100%.
job. Yeah.
They get paid if they sit on the TransLink board. They get paid if they sit on the Metro Vancouver. They get paid if they sit on subcommittees. It goes on and on and on. And yet, we as shareholders, people who live within Metro Vancouver, so we're effectively the shareholders of this organization, we're spending $1.6 million on a board that produced a wastewater treatment plant that went from 500 million to 4 billion. And none of them have been fired.
Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, it's. I want to sort of go back briefly to the New West Progressives. And as we talked about it early on, it took a while, mostly on your part and some of your people, to get it going. And the organization has earned the respect and the votes of the people in New Westminster through, again, bringing some of the issues to public information and working hard. So where do you see yourself sort of leading up this, even though election's a couple of years away, but 2 years is not a long time in an election cycle, actually. So do you have anything you can share with us at this time, or?
Well, I have a few things I can share. Some things are
Perfect.
kind of kept still being worked on, but what I can tell you is we're nearing the midpoint of the term. So we're in a few months we're going to be right halfway, and then we're on the other side, on the downhill side, where there's more time behind us than ahead of us. So the board right now is actively finalizing the 3-year strategic plan. So they're actually going to roll that out in the fall. But the board itself has really got only 2 core mandates. What it does is it gets good candidates and it helps raise money. And that's pretty much the vast majority of the work that the board does, in addition to some communication stuff, et cetera. So where we're at right now is really in the early stages of candidate identification, obviously looking to get a mayoral candidate for us. We had a fantastic mayoral candidate last time, which I think was a big part of helping to get both Councillor Paul Minnes and myself elected to council. You know, JP, we started this in 2017. It's been an interesting journey. So as I said, there's been 2 elections already under our belt. On the street, what I can tell you is the public is very impressed with the work that we're doing as an electoral organization and as a caucus. I can't tell you how many times I get pulled over at Safeway or at the gas station or in the library or wherever I'm at, and the public is saying it's time for a change. Like New Westminster, for your listeners who don't know, I moved there a little over 20 years ago. And when I got there, my wife and I, we thought there were no political parties in New Westminster. I thought that's kind of interesting. It's not like Vancouver, like there's no political parties. And yet, interestingly, JP, some candidates all had similar signs. So some of them had black and white signs, and they all looked like they had been printed by the same printer. And there was a certain theme going on. And suddenly and interestingly, those people all got elected to civic government. So we were under this illusion that there were no political parties and there was no backroom deals or things happening. I think a lot of people in Westminster were under that impression. And then an organization called Voice ran for the first time. An actual formal electoral organization ran. I can't remember, it was at least a decade ago. And they got just attacked because it was like, oh, how dare Voice bring party politics, to municipal government, et cetera. But what Voice did was Voice set into motion an exposure of what was actually happening within New Westminster. Because New Westminster, JP, for the past probably 3 to 4 decades has been controlled by a group that's been endorsed by the District Labour Council. So I'm not speaking out of school here, it's very open.
It's common knowledge.
Common knowledge. They're primarily kind of identified as kind of the civic NDP. And for many years, it served their purposes to not identify themselves. So in fact, they almost shamed individuals who thought of collectively working together like they did with Voice. They shamed them into shutting it down, get rid of it. This is horrible that you would actually do civic civic party. So what I got started in 2017, I knew this was going to happen with the progressives because I thought we're going to get attacked because we're that, But what ended up happening over the span of, it's something out of a book. You could write this in write my autobiography when I get older. I watched how we were able to kind of smoke this out. And it started with the 2018 campaign where the mayor at that point, Jonathan Cote, they ran something called Team Cote. It wasn't actually a formal political party, but you could, for the first time, saw them coalesce around a leader and you could identify that they were all working together. They had a campaign team or management together, all that stuff. And by 2022, effectively the gloves were off. They set up their own political organization. They have a constitution. You have to be a member of the NDP to join, all this stuff. It's now out there. So yet there are critics of the fact there's political electoral organizations, but I would argue you are now seeing a more realistic politic in the city of New Westminster than compared to 20 or 30 years ago, because people, you might have been under the impression these were all independents. They weren't independents. But what I will say just in closing is that what I loved about our group is, the New West Progressives, is it doesn't matter if you're a BC Conservative, Federal Conservative, BC Green, Federal Green, Liberal, whatever, and I'll even say this, NDP, you are welcome in the New West Progressives. We don't ask you to have a membership card. The only thing we ask you is to put the city first. Put New Westminster first. Put your provincial and federal politics aside. Every decision you're making is about the city. And that, JP, when I knocked on doors, boy, did that impress even a lot of New Democrats, because I couldn't have got elected in New Westminster without support from the NDP. I'm very open about that. I have a lot of NDP supporters.
Without support from otherwise members of the NDP, not the NDP.
So many, not the NDP party, and not the NDP, not Peter Julian or not the people who are in the
you mean NDPers,
Illuminati, right? NDPers. Like grassroots NDPers. I can't tell you how many people who, when I knocked on their door in 2022, said, I'm a card carrying, some of them actually came out and showed me their NDP card. They said, I'm a lifelong New Democrat. I am voting for you. I'm voting for the New West Progressives this time because we need change. We need some different voices, and you're going to represent that change. And it all manifested itself in 2022 when we made a huge breakthrough by winning 2 of the 6 council seats, which was on the political Richter scale, was a 7.0.
Very good, yeah. So, yeah, again, there, as you know, there used to be established organization in Vancouver, started in 1930s. And again, they consciously decided at that time that we want to keep any provincial or federal politics out of the civic affairs. So it didn't really matter how you voted or which party you belonged to otherwise. But as long as you were able to put the interests of the city of Vancouver, in your case, New Westminster, ahead, you're welcome in that tent. So I'm glad you're doing this, and I think you will do well. And
if I could add one thing I didn't mention, JP, which I'm very proud of, is that the board of directors does not dictate a single thing that I vote on. They are completely, I'm independent of them. So what we do is, as candidates, when we coalesce and the candidates are selected, we develop the policies as candidates. We actually develop the campaign platform. We commit to the public that when we're elected, we will implement that campaign platform. And if there's something that wasn't in the campaign platform that comes to the council for a vote, we have a free vote. We can vote whatever way. We're independent in that context. I'm so proud of that because, it's sometimes people don't understand that these boards can sometimes overreach, and they want to dictate how the elected officials are voting on, and that's where you get in trouble. That's where you get in trouble as a politician, and that's where you get in trouble as a elected board. But our elected organization is fantastic. I can't speak to my political opponents and how that works, but I know with us, they don't make us sign a pledge, which I believe my opponents have to sign. We're not told how to vote on one issue or another. We're elected because we love our city. We're elected because we're committing to put the city first, and we're committed to public service. And after that, the board lets us govern.
Well, I wish the New West Progressives and yourself all the best and success. I have a feeling we'll be hearing a lot more from you in the years to come. So thank you very much. Unless you have something to add, I think.
No, I just want to thank you for doing this, for bringing this out in the public. I'm looking forward to listening to the podcast. I do have a podcast as well, for the record, with Daniel Fontaine, and I set it up. I have 35 episodes now, which are under my belt, and I produce it every week. It comes out a new episode either Friday or Saturday every week. And it's very niche, it's very New Westminster focused, but I would dare say if you listen to it, you might pick up some interesting topics that are not only happening in New West, but you might hear something that also is reflected in your community as well. So I'd encourage everyone to check out that podcast as well.
Good. Yeah, to repeat, For the Record with Daniel Fontaine. Very good to spend some time with you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, JP.
Yeah, cheers.